now setting the scene for another panel. This panel, which will start at 6 o'clock, so right now we will discuss the EU single market, and we will discuss how to make the EU single market more resilient and how to avoid its fragmentation. This is the topic which is very important for the Czech EU presidency and for the Czech Republic as a whole. And I can see that our speakers are already entering the room. And yes, so I can see that all the speakers are here. So let's start with another discussion. As I said, the topic is EU single market and how to make it more resilient and how to avoid its fragmentation. I would like to pass the floor to my colleague moderator. The moderator of this event is Ms. Eva Anderová, who is currently the Vice President at the University of New York in Prague. Ms. Anderová has professional experience both from academia, from the economy, governance and economic diplomacy, and also from business. She also has held positions in boards of private and state companies in the Czech Republic, so I can't imagine a better person who could moderate discussion on the EU single market. So I would like to ask Ms. Anderová and speakers of the first panel to join us here on the stage and to take the floor. So please. Thank you.
How do you want to put us? Who is where I get?
Thank the hosting company very much for the introduction. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming and attending our panel. Obviously, there are so many experts among you that I think we are a privileged panel, and I'm actually very honored to have excellent panelists, seasoned experts with wealth of experiences in their respective areas, and they will actually present the state of play, I would say, of the topic in given framework, where our topic is making the EU single market more resilient. I cannot even imagine that this really pillar of all four pillars of the EU is one of the actually widest, but with regard to the annotation you might have read, we will move in a certain framework of the very wide aspect of a single market. So we know it's most important pillar through which all other policies can be successful or be affected in many ways. So our topic, given the single market resilience, covers more areas and it's vitally important. So let me please introduce the panelists. Outi, Slotboom. So shortly given their fantastic expertise. About Outi Slotboom, I have to say she's the Director for Strategy and Economic Analysis at the Directorate General for Internal Market Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs, Strategy and Economy Analysis. Outi's work focuses on monitoring and analyzing the business environment and the performance of EU EU industrial ecosystems in the single market, not only in the single market, but also globally. She particularly puts attention to small and middle-sized enterprises. Her background also refers not only to the actual leading as a director department in the Commission, but a former colleague of mine in another country from the Ministry of Finance. So, Outi, I will start with you, and before I get to other gentlemen, whom, of course, I will introduce the same way. So I'll do that right now. I will start with you, Ilya. You are a director, Digital Single Market and Consumer Policy, EuroCommerce. Ilya is a very seasoned professional. In this position, he has been leading EuroCommerce activities in a very broad range of policy issues, if I'm not mistaken, since 2013. Ilya advocates for a more competitive single market for retail and wholesale, supporting high customer trust in all sales channels, and always trying to strike the right balance between the interests of all involved stakeholders and effective and efficient enforcement of the acquis communautaire EU law. Your actual career has started in 2006, having been working for Public Matters and leading public affairs consultancy in Netherlands, but then you obviously moved to the Dutch Retail Federation, where you were responsible for payment system, product safety law, commercial establishment, and taxation issues. So this is short of your bios, and you could talk about your bios and experience much more, but I leave it on you. And the last and not least, very important guest from the Czech Republic, Mr. Štěpán Černý, the one with the wealth of experiences, as well as I have mentioned, vastly professional background in European affairs, policy and economy, all experience in the general government sector, focusing on the coordination of the Czech policy within the European Union. He joined the office of the government of the Czech Republic in 2014, and he is currently the Director General of the Section for European Affairs. Štěpán's previous work experience includes different positions, not only in the office of the government, but also of the Senate, of the Parliament of the Czech Republic, and he held internships at the EU Committee of the Region, and obviously as a very young man, he was involved with the Czech presidency many years ago, and also not to forget to mention, with experiences also in media. So thank you for allowing me to introduce you honorable colleagues. I will let them to open their introduction statements, and given that we will mutually handle particular questions and also let you, in given time constraint, a floor for asking some questions. So, Outi, as I opened it, of course, cherchez la femme, so you have to start. Female first. Gentlemen agree. So feel free to introduce the topics you would like to cover in today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Eva. Very happy to be here at this fantastic room at this very interesting event. We are preparing the big celebrations of single market turning 30 years old this is for next year. But of course, this is exactly the right moment to look back and see what has been achieved, where we stand now, what comes next, how time has changed the single market, how it has evolved. I wanted to pick up some of the questions which were in the program, because the second one I found intriguing. It said something like, should we have an economic policy around the single market? And I wanted to say that from my perspective, this is exactly what we have. The EU economy is this huge economic block that is the single market. 450 million consumers. Almost one third of all world trade is trade in the single market or with the single market. We have our economic weight in the world. 15% of world GDP is the single market. And that's really also in times of crisis, this is the economic powerhouse and anchor that keeps our economies floating. The single market is much more than the regulations and directives which set norms. It is very importantly free movement of people, goods, services, capital across the countries. Something that people who are younger than myself already very much tend to take for granted. I still remember the time when I had, for crossing any of the Belgian borders, I had a whole staple of wallets in the handbag, because for every country you needed a passport. There was a passport control in the train if you went from Brussels to Paris, and you needed your wallet with the national currency of each country that you were going to cross in case you needed to buy something. Also because the banking sector was not what it is now with bank cards paying. But coming back to economic policies, one cornerstone for the good functioning of the single market is competition policy. We have in place a policy which creates a level playing field, transparency. Everybody has to follow the same rules. We have rules on state aid, which means that member states cannot start competing each other, outbid themselves, for instance, in search for inward investment. We have the trade policy, which allows us to exert the power that we have due to our economic weight. We have social rules which apply everywhere in the single market. We have health and safety rules, and very importantly, and as came out very clearly in the previous panel, we have environmental rules which have to be respected by everybody who produces, consumes, or imports into the single market. So for me, indeed, what we have in place is a single market which is at the core of the EU economic policies. But then at the macro level, of course, we have economic policies for stability. We have the EU fiscal rules. We have more rules for countries which have adopted the euro. We have things, as you mentioned in the questions, we have some possibilities for public procurement. This was one of the examples you took up in the questions. We saw during the COVID-19 pandemic that member states work better together than if everybody acts on its own. When everybody was trying to find vaccines against COVID, the fact that due to rather ad hoc-ish arrangements, the Commission was able to procure vaccines for the whole EU 27 gave it a lot of negotiating power, which had an impact on prices, but also prevented the member states from starting to outbid each other. There are some other examples of joint public procurement where possibilities exist, And we have recently, in mid-September, put forward another proposal which would give some emergency possibilities for more public procurement at the EU level. Then maybe a final comment on the unemployment insurance, reinsurance. This would be a stabilization instrument. It was in the Commission's plans for the work program some years ago, discussions ongoing on how we stabilize, do we transfer funds among member states when unemployment is higher in one country and lower in another country, or do we borrow money and give it to those countries or to those individuals where unemployment is higher. What came out in the end was a solution to help out people from losing their jobs during the pandemic, an instrument which gave short-term support to temporary measures to retain people in employment or in training, known as SURE. This was an EU-level instrument which had some characteristics of an unemployment insurance, but was set out during the pandemic for help. This is only an introduction. We are heading towards new landscapes. I'm happy to come back to other things later on in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Outi. Before our dear distinguished other colleagues start, let me put you a question with relation to what you have already elaborated. How, from your perspective, do you see the future of the EU single market? Dear colleagues, then feel free to join in case you feel like. I'm starting with Outi, but of course, it's also your floors in case you would like to refer to.
Thank you very much. This question, of course, it's something I'm very happy to speak about because we are in the process of writing our single market at 30 years. Where are we? Where do we go next? And one of the issues that I mentioned already in my more backward-looking introduction was the single market as an export, as an entity which creates norms and standards for environment, for social, for human rights. And we are now increasingly also trying to make our partners and third countries adopt these values. We recently put forward a proposal to ban forced labor, and this we hope would become a global standard. So our standards beyond the economic efficiency values, human rights, environment, this is going to be a very important element and an increasing element of the single market in the future, in my view. Secondly, the world has changed. New technologies, digitalization, this has changed the way markets function. This we have to reflect in the way we manage the single market. It has also given us new tools to manage things, get notifications, get information on possible obstacles, barriers in the single market. So being more digital ourselves when markets are more digital. And finally, emergencies. We learned and we have tried to draw the lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic. We presented a proposal in September for a single market emergency instrument, which would have two main goals. First, in the panic which emerges when there is a crisis, like the pandemic, or possibly the Russian aggression in Ukraine, or any other future crisis which we hope will never happen but may happen, and we don't know which one. Very often in the panic, borders are closed, people cannot move. There are factories which need to be serviced, but the servicemen are on the wrong side of the border. There are hospitals, but the doctors live on the wrong side of the border, and there are huge disruptions due to border closures. We are trying to have better governance systems so that member states together with the Commission would immediately discuss, take positions, possibly ban or at least mitigate any excesses and keep the borders open in a future crisis. A second important element of that emergency instrument is being better prepared for shortages. And again, the example of the pandemic taught us how vulnerable we are in many ways, how quickly we can lose access to something which is important. And we will be looking at how we can, by cooperating and working jointly and working with our partners outside the EU, ensure better access to critical goods and services also in the future. So that would be my 3 things for the future of the single market.
Thank you very much for having explained the area in a very understandable and official way, given still your areas and barriers, which probably my colleagues will mention as well. And given barriers the single market is facing, and we can start from protectionism, distorted competition, fragmentation in tax system, separate national markets in given area for financial services, transport, energies, or varied commerce rules. We will come up to them. Standards practices between EU countries, very complicated and very, I would say, aspects that you face in your agendas on a daily basis. So, still coming to you, Outi, what would or what needs to be done still, if you think more on this, with regard to barriers you have mentioned in our panel discussion?
Of course, the very short answer is that although in goods trade most barriers have disappeared, in the area of services there are many barriers. 70% of our economy is about services, but trade in services among the member states is much less than trade in goods. And we have done a lot of studies on barriers. These are typically national regulations on protected professions, companies not being able to combine 2 activities, advertising bans, you name it. And what we see is that typically a regulation which is meant to protect a good reason only exists in a very small number of member states for any given area and in different sectors. So in other words, we believe that if the majority of the member states does not feel that they would need such national regulations, maybe even mutual learning among member states could help eliminate some of the services barriers. We will also next year put forward some more technical tools to make it easier to notify and discuss and possibly revise services barriers. But then in terms of the processes, the Commission has a lot of people who, as their main jobs, look at complaints and investigate any possible infringements of the EU rules. But secondly, the member states have a very important role. And that's an area where we would like to further improve the cooperation and indeed push the member states to do their part in monitoring that all the EU rules and single market rules are monitored. We have a relatively new body, the Single Market Enforcement Task Force, where member states and the Commission together discuss the most difficult barriers and try to find best ways in good, close, informal and formal cooperation to get rid of them or to reduce them. And finally, all of you, consumers, companies, you can notify barriers, or if you face problems in the single market in moving to live in another country or selling from your business in another country. We have a lot of very easily accessible tools like to solve it. You can send emails, and there are people who help explain what the rules are and who can help take the issue on your behalf to the national authorities of the country where you have this issue. So you can all help be part of building a more, even better functioning single market.
Thank you very much, Outi, for your very expertise and elaboration of the topic and short introduction you did. Just trying to control time, sorry for the constraint, gentlemen, but Ilya, I kindly ask you for your short introduction statement, and we'll try to accommodate the time and audience with the given topics.
Thank you. I will try to mix a bit what I was planning to say and also respond to what you just said. Maybe that also saves a bit of time. I think, point one, I think the single market is more relevant than ever. And I think the different crises that we have been facing, or we're still facing, so we had COVID, we have the war between Ukraine and Russia, high inflation, high energy prices, all show that these are better addressed when we work together. But at the same time, we see a problem, because during COVID, for instance, we see member states acting by themselves, coming up with their own rules, closing borders, making it, disrupting supply chains. So, for instance, an issue at a certain moment was, can we, because I represent retailers in Europe, we could not get products sometimes to the store. It was not that we were out of products, but it was because of the rules and the temporary measures and all the different types of rules across Europe that made it difficult. So here really is, I think, a role for the EU in the single market to play. And I think a part of that, and you already mentioned that you are working on this single market emergency instrument. For us, that should be an instrument that should keep the single market functioning in times of crisis. And it should not add new burdens on businesses, because when it's crisis, also businesses are in crisis, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, how it's going to affect your business, but also the same thing for consumers. So I think in this sense, for us, it's very important that we keep that element there. Then maybe a few months ago, we have done a joint statement with other industry organizations from European business organizations, because we actually were very concerned about the single market, because we see a lack of commitment by member states to actually further deepen the single market. There's a lot of talk, and endlessly there are new legal initiatives, but it's only about, we want to regulate more. Every issue that comes on the agenda needs to be regulated. And in our view, that's not the right approach, because the original idea of a single market was a free trade area. And obviously, we know that there is more, obviously, attached to the single market, like you said in the beginning. But this idea seems to be further and further away in time. And we asked the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council to look into that. Look, how can we go back to that original idea and not only endlessly regulate issues? And the problem there is enforcement. If you come up with rules and you cannot enforce them, you distort that level playing field that you were talking about earlier. And what we see is that if you have rules in Europe, European businesses will try to comply. If they don't, you can easily fine them because they're within the EU borders. But we see more and more, especially in retail, competition from outside the EU. A lot of people buy now, we all did it, I guess, something from a Chinese web shop, which was probably much cheaper, maybe not the same quality, and maybe also not, according to European standards, safe. And this is, in certain countries, really becoming a problem. And now we see all these rules coming towards us with the green transition, with the digital transformation. And for us, this is like, yeah, okay, we understand we need to have rules, but if you only can enforce them in the EU and not enforce them over other companies that sell to EU consumers, I mean, we're going to be out of business. And I think if we go back a bit earlier to the discussions we had today, I mean, how can we ever be some kind of a global economic powerhouse, if we adopt rules that in the end we cannot enforce and hurt our businesses? And then maybe just I have more to say, but I think to wrap it up, because I think there's one important thing that we see now with the high inflation, and I think this is a good, maybe because you just mentioned the single market enforcement task force, where you talk with member states about all kinds of businesses. So what we see now, that a lot of member states try to do something to help consumers deal with high inflation. Obviously, that's a good thing, but at the same time, for our sector, we just had COVID, so a lot of companies don't have a lot of reserves. Sourcing prices of products, you need to buy them somewhere, are increasing, and your operational costs are increasing. And on top of that, we see that consumers they call it down trading, so consumers buy cheaper products or buy less products. So we're in some kind of a squeeze as a sector. And at the same time, we see now in different countries, we see it in Hungary, Croatia, Greece, price regulation rules. So they kept the prices at the retail level. Yeah, that's all nice, but in the meantime, in 2 countries, retailers are selling now products that are kept at a loss. And what happens then is you need to increase your other prices. So it's actually maybe even increasing inflation at the same time. And I think this could be a good thing, I think, that for you to address perhaps in this task force. And I'll stop here because I also want to give my other panelists the time to say something. Thank you.
We'll manage the time still, but let me have, hopefully not the devil's advocate question on you, with regard to what you said and Outi said. Next year, the EU single market will have celebration of its 30 years anniversary. And this question probably I can put to all of the 3 of you. Do you think that the single market is still relevant, and should we strive toward further economic integration in the EU? What would you say to it, Ilya?
Well, it's like I said in the beginning, yes, the single market is more relevant than ever, because this is what we have here in Europe, and I think we need to build on that. And I think it was very funny because in the earlier panel, somebody asked a question like, does the Czech Republic need the euro to be successful in the single market? I'm like, no, it's not relevant. What you need to be successful in the single market is that you play by the rules and that you ensure the other member states play by the rules. And then we come back to the role, I think, of the Commission. You need to make sure that everybody plays by the rules, because that's the only way how we can be successful and how you can have a really good functioning single market. And I think I can give the floor now to,
Thank you very much, Ilya. As I said prior, last but not least, Štěpán, the floor is yours. Feel free to either wrap up or open, because you might also refer to some of the annotated questions, but it is on your decision, the topic. So thank you for opening that.
Thank you very much for the floor. Thank you for your introductory remarks, to both of you. I will try to just maybe put some context on what the EU Presidency Council actually is doing with the single market, because, well, what we heard is that the single market is under fire from many sides. I would definitely agree. It's not that we can bury the single market yet, but there's not much willingness among the member states to do any more in the single market. It's not that the member states are not naughty people who just don't like the single market as such, is that the pandemic is one element that both of you referred to, and I think it's still a starting point for our thinking that even the Czech Republic, as a big supporter of the single market, which put single market high on the agenda, was the first to close down the borders and the last one to open them for some free circulation of goods and such stupid element as masks and disinfectants and stuff like that. And we were really the last one to liberalize our economy and a free flow of goods. And this was a temptation which was facing many member states, and it's still there. After 30 years of the single market, there's much to celebrate, but the fact that our presidency, even if we put single market high on the agenda, has almost zero legislative proposals from the Commission to further strengthen the single market, it's also something to consider. It's not that I'm blaming the Commission, but the political reality is there, that any further liberalization in services is out of the question. Why? Because the globalization in the whole world is on a backtrack, and it's something which we feel everywhere. WTO is dead. We can maybe convince ourselves that it's not the case, but it's true. No big global superpower is willing to further liberalize their trade relations, no matter what the theater in Washington you may see. That's TTIP or anything close to that is also that. Maybe we can strike a couple of trade deals with our like-minded partners in other parts of the world, but as everybody knows, the trade is bigger between the member states and the countries which are close to each other. So it's a natural element that our EU presidency strive to protect the single market and to tackle all the challenges to the single market, and that's why we are putting really huge emphasis on implementation of the rules we have. We know that probably it's quite high and steep hill to try to protect all that we can, but there are countries such as us, which is heavily dependent on our economic growth on the single market. There are countries which can do without the single market. There are countries which think they can do without the single market, but they are quite eager to invest elsewhere and to have economic ties elsewhere. And then in the end, COVID pandemic was an eye-opener to many, that we need to have a more assertive trade policy, that we need to make sure that our global trade partners are not the ones who are the cheapest, but the ones who are the most reliable. We're halfway there. Still, some member states will have to do some rethinking within them whether the cheapest products are the best or the ones where you can have reliable suppliers are the best. For instance, just a small element, our presidency umbrellas and our presidency ties are very popular, and we are asked by everybody to give them out. We would like to, but they are stuck in a port container in Shenzhen for 3.5 months because the port is in lockdown, and maybe will be in foreseeable future. You will have your ties and umbrellas in February where they will be out of fashion, and that's probably the case not only for the umbrellas but for other elements as well. So that's basically our take from the presidency about the single market, and it's not that we are burying it, but we are trying to protect what we can and to maybe see some small areas where we can add to implementation, notably digital area, the new business models which were mentioned here, which are transnational by definition, but there are fragmented rules everywhere, the digital services, but also the services which are physical in their nature, but they are obtained via a digital app, which, for instance, you probably know, ride sharing, ordering your food and elements like that. So this is my initial comment, and I'm happy to engage in discussion with all of you.
Thank you very much, Štěpán. You have actually, of course, responded to my intended first question, but let me have the one. What measures will the Czech government propose with regard to making the EU single market more resilient vis-à-vis the coronavirus and the Russian aggression against Ukraine? If you can, in a given time, elaborate a little on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, the rules of the single market are robust. What we have to look into is the enforcement of these rules. We need to make sure that where there is abuse of these rules, which is usually by a couple of member states or their regional authorities or their local authorities, that there is a swift rectification of this process, that we have a really robust set of measures how to see where the weaknesses are, so you don't have to go to the European Court of Justice with every small complaint, but there is a much quicker quick resolution or name and shame system as well. On the other hand, we also need to make sure that the rules we have are updated to the new business models and the new realities of transborder commerce and the new realities of the way how we live our life, that we use things which we didn't use before, and now we don't use some things which we used to use before. I'm thinking notably about the explosion of digital services everybody is using, and how to tackle the fact that we have become dependent or maybe addicted to cheap Russian fossil fuels. Well, we have to understand that the cheapest energy is the energy we don't really use and that we save. Savings are there. Just because of pure operation of the price system, we have saved some 19% of our gas consumption this year as a country. And then we forge our relations with countries which have been reliable and which are like-minded and which do not use trade relations as a weapon. So that's, well, Russia comes first in place, but we have to really reassess whether our other key trade partners are really contributing towards our interests or not, because trade is not a exercise which has zero value, but it's a trade really forges the relations, and in this case our relations have become more fragile.
Thank you very much, Štěpán. Dear honorable guests, colleagues, is there any wrap-up statement, given your expertise, or message you would like to speak of at the end of our panel discussion? Okay, if you feel like you have covered
Give me
all.
the floor. No, I just wanted to point out, it was, I think, something interesting. We just launched, or we just published a study about the investment need of the retail and wholesale sector in Europe until 2030 to make the, and then it's a, so on addition what the sector already itself is investing, it's somewhere between 350 and 600 billion euros. That's only one sector, but to be fair, it's 1 out of 4 businesses in Europe is a retailer or wholesaler. But this is the main focus is digital, it's green, and it's people. And I think this is just an example of the only way, I think, to get there is to have a truly functioning single market, to make sure there is real competition, that we have new ideas, new innovation, because I think that's the only way, at least our sector, can deliver to consumers. At the same time, we need help as well to get there, because these are the ambitions of the EU as well, the digital and green transition. But I think it's clear, and it's probably for all other sectors as well, we cannot do this alone. So I think also, especially now in this time of crisis, where everybody's under pressure and has other priorities, I think it's important that we keep that in mind somehow, and that maybe that this also should come to the foreground in future policy by the Commission and obviously in discussions in the Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilya, Outi, and Štěpán. The floor is yours.
A very short closing statement, since we are now in the process of advertising our publications. The point you just made about the need to solve problems much faster than through spending years at the Court of Justice is really very important and essential. And of course, the task force and other fora and the internet tools for reporting problems help. But what you said of naming and shaming, I also wanted to market our single market scoreboard, which will be published in January next year as part of the single market 30 years package. But it is a digital publication. The current version is available on our website, and this is where we rank member states on how they have implemented rules, and it is an effective tool which also deserves its place. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything you want to add, Štěpán? So we are perfect in timing. Obviously, our honorable audience also might be observing that the introduction was very right. They're really very experienced colleagues whom I sincerely thank, because to me, and hopefully also to the audience, this discussion was enriching. And at least I leave very relieved that if everything regarding the single market and its resilience is covered by you and your colleagues, then I'm relieved, and I thank you for all efforts you do.
Thank you.
Thank you for being panelists. Thank you very much.